All right. In our first series, we covered a lot of the history of Judaism. Now we're going to look at what it has historically meant to be a Jew, along with the major holidays and feasts. Judaism is both an ethnicity and a religion. It's rather unique in the historical religions because it's one of the few major religions that you can be born as that religion. The Muslims will later say that everyone is born a Muslim, and the Hindus will also kind of hold to that. But neither Hinduism nor Islam believes that you have an ethnic connection with the religion. Judaism is unique because everyone in Judaism traces their ancestry biologically back to Abraham. So historically, to be a Jew means that as an ethnic Jew, you are accepting the responsibilities of the law. It was your observance of the Mosaic law that most clearly defined what being a Jew was. And the difference you'll see here in the daughter religion, Christianity, and the mother religion, Judaism, is that whereas Judaism is both an ethnicity and a religion, stressed orthopraxy, or correct ritual actions. In other words, you either kept the Sabbath or you didn't. You either celebrated the Seder or any of the Jewish holidays, or you didn't. Christianity, the daughter religion, eventually began to think more about orthodoxy or correct belief. So let's look at Judaism a little more closely. In the ceremonial cycle that emerges in Judaism, you see that the heart of Judaism is the home. The heart of Judaism is in the family. It's both an ethnicity and a religion. And the center of Jewish life is the observation of the Sabbath. It's the most compelling symbol of what it means to be Jewish. And it is that 24-hour period between the sundown on Friday and sundown on Saturday. That Sabbath was a day of being, not becoming. It was all about family. It was all about worship. It was all about God. And if the heart of Judaism is in the home, on that Sabbath celebration, the men would assemble in the synagogue where they could study the scripture together. And of course, the leader there at the synagogue was the rabbi. And so this Sabbath day, it's all about recreation. It's all about emphasizing God and our role in his life. The Jewish calendar, much like the later Muslim calendar, is going to be lunar. So you'll notice that it has 353 or 354 days, which means that every few years or so, they had to add an additional month to get the lunar calendar caught up to the solar calendar. There were three major feasts. The first was Passover or Pesach. This were called the Exodus from Egypt. And at this Passover service, the entire family would celebrate what is called the Seder. Each one of these elements here on this picture, it represents something within the service that is going to help them remember the ancestors. For example, the bowl in the middle carried water with salt in it to help them remember the tears of their ancestors when they were slaves in Egypt. The second major feast is the Feast of Weeks. In Hebrew, it's called Shavuot. In English, it's called Pentecost. And here they commemorated and remembered the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. The third major feast was Booths, in Hebrew Sukkot, or in English Tabernacles. This commemorated the wandering of the Jewish people in the desert for 40 years before they entered Canaan. And you'll notice on this picture here that there are little rooms being built on the balconies of these homes. These little rooms are the booths that some Jewish people assemble in their homes or yards to give a physical recreation of the tents that their ancestors lived in while they were wandering in the wilderness. If there are 3 major feast days, there are 4 major holy days. The first is Rosh Hashanah. It is the Jewish New Year's, and it occurs annually just before the Feast of Booths. And in preparation for this New Year celebration, they would they would have a 10-day period of preparation called the Days of Awe. It would be a time of introspection and self-evaluation. There would be a time where if you have sinned against someone or offended someone during the year, then during this time you would go to them and seek to make things right with them. The Day of Atonement occurs 4 days before the Feast of Booths. It is the annual day of sacrifice in which the ancient people of Israel would have sacrificed in the temple, and that blood would have been taken into the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was. Some of that blood would have been poured on top of the Ark of the Covenant called the mercy seat, and the blood dripping down would have atoned or covered the people's sins. There is no temple now, so there is no sacrifice, but it is still a period of fasting, penance, and confession. The third is the day of Purim. This holiday is probably among the more joyous. Many of the adults will dress up in costumes, as you see here, to celebrate Esther's deliverance of the people from destruction at the hands of Haman. And finally, Hanukkah. That is the 4th holy day. This celebrates the Maccabees overthrowing the Greek overlords and reestablishing the nation of Israel as an independent entity in the 2nd century BCE. And when they were cleansing the temple, they only had 1 day's worth of olive oil to light the lamps, and the ceremonial laws required 7 days of purification, and they had no access to any more oil, so they burned what they had, and instead of burning for 1, it burned for almost a week. There are life cycle ceremonies. The first for males takes place on the 8th day. It is circumcision, and this is a very clear sign of God marking the child as belonging to God and set apart to God, and it is a sign of their admittance into the Jewish community. At the age of 13 or so, a Jewish boy, if he hasn't already, will learn to read Hebrew, and then will have this bar mitzvah, meaning son of the covenant. And at this bar mitzvah, he will read this Hebrew in front of family and friends in the synagogue. And from this day forward, he will be considered an adult religiously in the community. And this is him taking for himself the vows that were made for him at his circumcision. For Jewish girls, among some of the sects, they too have one, puberty ritual, and this is called bat mitzvah, daughter of the commandment, and this usually takes place at about age 11. Because Judaism is both a religion and an ethnicity, the fourth life cycle ritual is marriage. And if Jewish girls are not giving birth to Jewish children, then the Jewish ethnicity can end. And finally, the fifth one is death. And like their Muslim counterparts, Jews like to bury the dead soon after they die, and they're buried in simple shrouds and so forth. And at that death, the family and others gather for what is called the Kaddish, or the prayer praise, which all of the survivors recite in honor of God. There are dietary or kosher laws. These are the distinctive laws in which Jews do not eat pork. They do not eat shellfish. The more Orthodox Jews separate dairy and meat products. And it is one of the easiest ways historically to see that, who was and who was not a Jew. If there is a creed in Judaism, and there is not, but if there is a creed in Judaism, it would probably be summed up by the writings of Deuteronomy 6:4-9. A belief in God's unity and the need for us to love and serve Him. And here is what that Shema is in English. Hear, and that's what Shema means. Listen, hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. And you can see that the remainder of this text is explicating that, showing exactly what that means. Within Judaism, genetically, there have been two historic large groups. There are the SEPHARDIM. These are Jews who follow the Babylonian tradition of Jewish law, and they, because they come from the Mediterranean, they were influenced by the Muslim domination of Spain. They speak a particular dialect of Hebrew called Ladino, which is a blending of Spanish, Hebrew, and Aramaic. The one that we're most familiar with is the ASHKENAZIM. These two also followed the Babylonian tradition, but they added in the Palestinian tradition as well, and they tended to be those who were coming from northern Europe, Germany, Poland, and so forth. These are the ones with which we are most familiar. There is a group that is not on your quiz, but it is a growing group within Judaism, and these are Jews who were ethnic Jews, but who do not practice the faith. They aren't observing the Sabbath. They may occasionally go to, the Passover service or this type of thing, but they are largely Jewish by ethnicity only. So remember, the idea here is that if a person is born a Jew or converts, they are a Jew. So, for most of our history in Judaism, most people were Orthodox. They observed the Torah, they observed the kosher laws, they observed the dietary and ceremonial laws as best they could. But beginning in the 19th century, in the 1800s, a group of German Jews began to say, is there a way that we can celebrate both our ethnicity and religion, but not have to have these distinctive clothing and this distinctive diet? And out of that emerged what is called the Reformed movement. And they would observe the Jewish holidays, They would expand that rule so that of the Jewish mother to include a Jewish father. So that means that if a Jewish father marries a Gentile mother, the child is Jew. Historically, that would not have been the case. Notice that they did not really look forward to the Messiah, and it was really, in many ways, about fitting in with the larger culture where you found yourself. The Orthodox Jews did not go along with that. They're the strictest form of Judaism. They tend to follow the old ways. They observe the Jewish law, the ceremonial laws, the cutting of the hair, the kosher laws, and as closely as possible retain their commitment to the 613 commands of the law. Beginning in the latter part of the 1800s, yet another group emerges. This would have been the conservative Jews, and they kind of tried to strike a balance between Reformed and Orthodox Judaism. Whereas Orthodox Jews would say only if a Jewish child has a Jewish mother are they Jewish. The Reformed are saying no, that includes the father as well. Whereas the Orthodox are saying in their worship services, we're going to do this all in Hebrew, and the Reformed are saying, well, no, we're going to do it in the vernacular of the language that we speak in the land that we live. The conservatives are going to kind of try to strike a balance between those two, so that if the service is taking place, there will be a blending of both Hebrew and the vernacular language, and they're going to try to be in the world and of it, so to speak, and they're going to try to retain that Jewish tradition without also having them stand out overly significantly as a very different people within their larger community. They, like their Reformed brethren, would accept women as rabbis. Finally, the smallest group is the Reconstructionists, and they were saying, again, like the Reformed, that the father, if he was Jewish, that child was also Jewish. So let me conclude very quickly here with some similarities between Judaism and the daughter religion, Christianity. Both Judaism and Christianity emphasize the importance of the scripture and the action that comes out of that. This would eventually result in a strong work ethic, whether it be Jewish or what we might call the Puritan work ethic, both heavily committed to the ideas of education and the importance of that people be able to read the scripture for themselves and put it into practice. And both, particularly here in America, see that religious freedom means freedom from religion as well as freedom of religion. Like their divisions in Christianity with denominations, formal divisions in Judaism are seen as an expression of the American pluralism that is so heavily advocated here in America. No single authority speaks for the Jewish people. There is no pope. There is no high priest that speaks for Judaism. Large numbers of Jews here in America are secular or heritage Jews, and intermarriage has increased so that up to 53% Jewish men and women have married Gentile partners. So what does that look like in terms of actual numbers? What this means is it means that here in America, the Jews would usually strongly identify themselves with one specific form of Judaism. For example, 42% of American Jews are Reformed, but they comprise only 35% of those who are active synagogue members. Notice that 35% of Americans would identify themselves as conservative, but they make up 43% of all the Jews who are active in synagogue. You have about 6% of American Jews who would identify themselves as Orthodox, and the remainder would consider themselves Reconstructionists.